Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern Bar Cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 124 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining me for another thrilling interview episode, where we infiltrate the heavily guarded compounds of the world's most secretive spirits and cocktail experts and narrowly escape with knowledge that will make you a better bartender. This time around, I sit down with my friend and certified sommelier, Joey Fox, of Old Westminster Winery. Our topic of discussion is natural wine, a term you've probably heard, but one that most people, including myself, don't know a whole lot about. I want to say a few things about this interview before we get started here. Number one, you'll hear me say this a couple times throughout this conversation, but I think natural wine is the biggest trend in the wine world right now, but it's one that most people aren't familiar with at all. And I think that's important because anytime you come across a massive sweeping trend that's flying somewhat under the radar, it can really pay off to give it your full attention. That's the first reason I'm really excited to bring you this discussion. Number two, this is another two-part interview, and I know we just had that with the Acid Trip podcasts that immediately preceded this one. No, we're not trying to squeeze more content out of this than we should. It just so happens that this was a long, interesting tasting and conversation that really deserved a two-part episode. And finally, I made a very deliberate effort to go into this conversation without having done much research at all, which is the opposite of what I normally do. Usually I try to ask really specific, pointed questions, really steer the conversation. But in this instance, I wanted you to be a fly on the wall as I tasted several natural wines for the first time. I had a strong suspicion going into this that we'd encounter some really interesting flavors and dig into some really cool ideas. And fortunately for you, I wasn't wrong. But before we begin our journey into the world of grapes, vines, yeast, and bubbles, let's take this opportunity for you to make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the classic coffee cocktail. To make this drink, you'll need, first of all, no coffee. Haha! You thought you saw where this was going, but you didn't. The coffee is a red herring. But you do need 1 ounce of cognac. I like a VS or a VSOP. 2 ounces of tawny port, which is a sweet barrel-aged and oxidized expression. A ½ ounce of simple syrup, and 1 whole egg. Combine these ingredients in a cocktail shaker with ice, shake vigorously for 20 to 30 seconds, really give that egg a chance to get beaten up inside the shaker, then double strain into a rocks glass over ice and garnish with freshly grated nutmeg. This cocktail makes its first written appearance in Jerry Thomas's famous Bartender's Manual, published in 1887, and he was also aware of the irony in its name, but speculated that its color was like that of coffee when you pour it into the glass, and thus the moniker. But if the name still irks you, well, just go ahead and call it a brandy port flip, because that's what it is. You've got the brandy and port in kind of an upside down Manhattan ratio where there's twice as much fortified wine as there is spirits. And then you throw in that simple syrup for sweetness and the whole egg for lots of creamy, rich texture. That's about as classic a flip recipe as you'll ever encounter, so feel free to riff on it during your next gathering. With the holidays coming up, this might be something you try out on your friends and family. So, now that you've got yourself a delicious cocktail where wine happens to be in the driver's seat, let's turn our attention back to this fascinating natural wine interview with Joey Fox of Old Westminster Winery. Some of the topics we discuss in part 1 of this interview include what the term natural wine really means and what you can expect from wines that fall into this category, how Joey worked his way into the natural wine world by way of tea, and then coffee, and then restaurants, and then organic vegetable farming, how native yeast fermentation lack of chemical additives and preservatives, and lack of fining and filtration can wildly impact the flavor profile of a wine. What the terms skin contact, orange wine, and pet nat mean, and why you're going to start hearing these terms a lot more often. How natural winemaking practices can take a grape that's usually used to make Cougar Juice, aka Pinot Grigio, and turn it into something extremely refined and food-friendly. Which sparkling wine predates champagne by over 200 years, and much, much more. During this chat, Joey tastes me through two really cool natural wines. One is called Franck Fizz, which is a lightly sparkling red wine, and the other is called Seeds and Skins, which is a really beautiful orange wine. We talk history, we give tasting notes, and we really dive deep in this conversation. So buckle up, keep your corkscrews at the ready, and prepare to be dazzled by the wide and wonderful world of natural wine. Enjoy. Joey, thanks for being on the podcast.
Eric, thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, so today we are at actually a beautiful location, beautiful tasting room filled with beautiful bottles of wine. We are in Westminster, Maryland, and we're talking with Joey Fox about natural wine. So can you just kick us off by introducing yourself and letting all of our listeners know who you are and how you came to be working here?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Joey Fox. I am the sommelier and Maryland sales manager here at Old Westminster Winery. My path started before I was able to drink wine. When I was around 15 years old, I remember getting really into tea and kind of finding the differences between green tea, black tea, oolong, and then when I learned that they're all made from the same plant, that was really an eye-opening experience. Looking back now, I can say, I was into terroir before I knew what terroir was. But as I grew older, that turned into a coffee addiction. Eventually, I got into beer. I remember my friend's dad telling me, you're going to be really into wine one day. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. Here we are. So I worked my first job was at the wine market, a really great restaurant that was located in downtown Baltimore. I started as a busser when I was 20. Eventually, I looked at all the wine bottles and I was just so curious, what is Bordeaux and Burgundy, and what are the differences? Why is that $10 and why is that $50? And why do I care?
Right.
I would stay after the shift and just kind of look at all the bottles and read them until I was old enough to finally drink them when I turned 21. And I really, I just remember trying, there's two wines that really stick out to me that made a really big impression for me. We had Domaine Weinbach. They're in Alsace, and they make a Gewürztraminer. And this was, if you've had Gewürztraminer before, such an aromatic expression of a grape. It's really kind of blew my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. I also had a Beaujolais from Domaine Tivon. And this was just raspberry juice. And I remember, even when I was still a busser, I remember seating tables and kind of selling wine then. It was, I got yelled at from a couple of servers. They're like, what are you doing? That's my job. And I'm like, just selling them the good stuff.
There you go. It's kind of cool too, because as a busser, you're literally picking up the wine bottle after the meal's done. And so you're sitting there kind of with the dregs, but then also with this one really kind of iconic piece of hardware, right? This is a wine bottle is a really special thing in a way that some liquor bottles are not. Or I guess maybe differently, right? Because the year is so much more important on a wine bottle, and the maker's name, and there's these subtle details. I think that spirits labels and spirits bottles are dogs, but wine labels are cats, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's way more situationally dependent. The year is important. These little details are really important.
Absolutely.
So how did you come to become a sommelier, and specifically, how did you get hooked up with Old Westminster Winery? Yeah,
so after working my way through the wine market, I eventually became a beer manager in the wine shop. And so my girlfriend at the time, now fiance,
Congrats.
Thank you. She was doing organic vegetable farming, and I went to a potluck one day, and I remember being really floored by the knowledge and breadth that the hosts had. They talked about all the seeds and how they did, and it was really fascinating to me. That kind of struck a chord with my whole nerdiness about how everything does. And I reached out to them and asked if I could volunteer for them a day a week in exchange for vegetables. That eventually turned into a paying gig. The third weekend, they're like, "We're going to pay you," and I'm like, "Okay, cool." So between my wine background and then 2 years of 1 day a week of organic vegetable farming, this was kind of a natural crossroads. And one day at a tasting in Baltimore at the B&O Railroad Museum, I met Drew, one of the three owners here, and tried through, I guess I should mention that I've had their wine at the wine market and really fell in love specifically with their Albarino. The 2013 Albarino was a kind of ground-shaking wine for me, because Albarino's only grown in one part of the world, famously in the northwest of Spain, Rías Baixas.
It's one of those Basque wines, right?
Actually, the west, the far northwest.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I tried theirs, and it was incredible. I met Drew, tried the new vintage of Albarino, and we had been talking about it. I was brutally honest. I said, "Hey, I love your 13 Albarino. I don't think I love this one as much." And he was like, "You know what, you're right. The 13 was all grown by us. This one, we did a mix of two vineyards. We're not as pleased with the other fruit, and that you're right. It's not as good." I reached out to him later saying, "Hey, I would love to work a harvest. If you have any work, please let me know." I came out here a month or two later and had an interview with Lisa, who is the middle sister, the winemaker here, and started my first harvest 4 years ago now.
So this is year number 4, and has it just wrapped up here?
Yeah, 2019 has just wrapped up the harvest. We're pressing the last of the red grapes now that will find their home in a barrel and age for a couple of years before finding their way into a bottle.
Yeah, and we were speaking off camera that you're actually really excited about this vintage. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, this vintage was legendary. Coming off 2018, which was a very wet year, a very rough year for everyone in the Mid-Atlantic, up to New York, down to Virginia. 2019 was the polar opposite swing. So grapes, unlike a lot of vegetables, like dry and sunny, and rain is the enemy for grapes. We had a lack of rain this year, which means we'll have really great yields, and there was very little disease pressure.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, because with that moisture comes things like mold and stuff like that.
Rot, mold.
So I want to kind of get into what natural wine is here. We're going to take a break in just a minute, do a quick little reset, and pour some wine. But I want to give a little preface to people about what this episode's about, why I wanted to come here and speak with you about it, and how we're going to go through this. And in my opinion, natural wine is the biggest trend in the wine world right now, and yet it is probably one of the least known. And that is baffling to me. Right, because I got my WSET2 certification in 2013 or 2014, and the intermediate is not it's not a baby course. It's not the advanced course, but it's you still go through a lot of wine knowledge. We had to have in-depth regional knowledge about these different wine regions, and so it completely surprised me that natural wine was not anywhere in those course materials. And this is in hindsight that I'm kind of confused, because it's all over now. Restaurants are completely gutting their beverage programs and restructuring them around natural wine. This is a thing that's happening. It's happening all over the place in DC, and I'm hearing about it. And so I'm hoping that before we take a quick break here, could you just give us the biggest of high level overviews of what natural wine is?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with a low-level overview. This is what Alice Firing defines as natural wine. It is wine without any crap in it. Really kind of easy to understand. Any layman can say, oh, yeah, I get that. But natural wine is wine that is made with minimal intervention, both in the fields and in the cellar. It is wine with all native yeast fermentations. So in our winery that you see here, there's yeast everywhere. And when we harvest the grapes, these yeasts are on the grapes. When you take them into the cellar and you crush them, those native yeasts, that's part of the terroir here, and that is where the fermentations will start from. Typically, natural wines will also be low to no sulfur, which is a preservative, and they will be unfined and unfiltered. So you can see here, this is pretty cloudy. This is a sparkling wine, and there's no filters in any of our wines.
Gotcha. So that does sometimes lead to a little bit of sediment in the bottle?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I gotcha. So unfiltered, no chemicals, and natural fermentation. Are those kind of like the three signposts of a natural wine? Yeah,
I would say so. With conventional wine, there are up to 72 additives that you can use in wine. Stuff like ferrocyanide, a lot of unfun things that you can find in there that are above regulation.
So we just gave you that high-level overview. We'll be back in just a minute to have our first taste of a natural wine and get a little bit deeper into these three things, like this lack of additives, this natural fermentation, and this, what's the last one I'm forgetting?
Unfined, unfiltered, native yeast.
It's unfined, unfiltered native yeast. So we'll be right back with Joey Fox. All right, so we are back with Joey Fox, and tell us a little bit about this bottle that you're about to crack open.
So this is Franck Fizz. Franck Fizz is a really exciting new project that we just did. This is 90% Cabernet Franc from the 2017 vintage that has aged all in stainless steel. In 2019, this year, we got 1 ton of a really fun grape called Marquette. We took this Marquette, the 1 ton, crushed it up, added the fresh juice into this Cabernet Franc, immediately bottled it, and had the secondary fermentation happen in bottle under this crown cap. That's that.
So that's really interesting to me. To step way back for folks, obviously when we're talking about wine, we're talking about a fermented beverage. It's not fermented and then distilled like a spirit would be. It's just fermented, which gives us anywhere from like usually 13 to 17% in a wine. Is that?
I would say you can see stuff as low as 8 in like really natural winemakers in cool climates in France. But on average, I'd say between 11 and 14.
11 and 14.
Even up to 16 in California.
Right. So we've got a wine here. So you made a wine the prior year, and then
two prior
right? You said 2017.
Yeah.
So you had wine, and that was just sitting in barrels, correct?
Stainless steel. It never actually went in the barrels. Okay,
so it fermented in stainless steel. You take it, you bottle it, and then you also dope in some of this fresh juice from the new grape. What was it, Marquette?
Marquette. Yep, it's a French-American hybrid grape variety, which we'll get into hybrid soon.
Yes, yeah, that's another fun part of this. So what happens there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to like walk my way through this with what I know about wine, but when you add that new juice, all of a sudden new sugar becomes available, right? And so the yeast that's coming in with that sugar, in addition to anything that might be currently in the existing wine, all of a sudden wake up. And they're like, whoa, okay, there's more to eat. We thought it was done, but it's like, kind of like the second course.
Precisely.
And so that is the secondary fermentation you're referring to that's occurring in this bottle.
Yep.
And so I'm guessing the only way we know what ABV this is if you crack open a bottle and then literally measure it, right?
Yeah, or if you can do the math. You can take the ABV of the initial wine, take in the potential, the total sugar volume. I'm not smart enough to get to that total, but our winemaker would be.
Yeah, it is doable. So yeah, let's crack it open, give it a taste, and maybe while we're doing that, you could talk a little bit about the appeal of natural wine, and in light of some of these, like, we were talking earlier about these additives.
Yeah.
I'm curious, about what the appeal is at the consumer level, like from like an individual person, right? But then also at the program level, at the beverage program level, at our favorite bars and restaurants, because we've been kind of comparing notes on some of the natural wine programs in DC that we're both familiar with.
Yeah, I think it's really important. People are shopping at Whole Foods and heading over to a shop right next door and buying Apothic Red. I don't mean to throw them under the bus, but they're a really prime example of an incredibly popular line that's far from natural. People care about these grass-fed meat and organically grown vegetables, but then they turn the corner and buy highly synthetic, highly processed wines. And there's kind of a divide between that.
It's kind of like, it feels like something that's been going on in the background without us knowing it.
Yeah,
right?
There's so little information out there. When we talk about natural wine, a lot of natural winemakers don't talk about, they don't flaunt that they are natural wine. And there's a whole bunch of ambiguity beyond that. You don't have to say, the only thing you have to put on your bottle is contains sulfites. And even if you don't add sulfites, there's natural sulfites in wine. So that's something you'll see on every bottle. There's a lack of transparency in the wine world.
Yeah, let's talk about sulfites, because I think, you listed, you said that there's like a bazillion different, legal additives that can be put in wine, but that one, sulfites, that's one that I've seen, right? You read a wine label and you see contains sulfites and you're like, meh, okay, they're allowed to sell it, so it must not be that bad for me, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the only time that I've really heard anything about sulfites is like, oh, wine without sulfites won't give you as bad of a hangover. And I kind of use it as like that's my access point, but like, I don't know why. I don't even know what sulfites are, except they start with sulf and so does sulfur.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I know. So tell me more. Yeah,
so sulfites are a preservative. If you eat dried fruit or ketchup, they're in a lot of different things. To kind of zoom out real quick, wine, I like to think of wine as a journey of grapes turning into vinegar. That's the timeline, the start and the end of it. Wine is this really narrow slither that we have where these grapes taste delicious. Adding sulfur broadens that window by a little bit. You have more leeway. You just have a little more to work with. And all these other additives their goal is to make that window even bigger.
Right. And if you think about that from a business standpoint, like, great.
Yeah.
Awesome, right?
Absolutely.
Especially when, when you start trying to do things like lower the prices on your products to make them more accessible to a wider range of consumers, then that type of decision is very much on the table, because, the lower you drop your prices, the lower the cost of your inputs have to be, which means that as a business person, as a person who's making that decision, you don't really want to be losing sleep of like, oh no, like, is this the right time to be stopping this fermentation? By broadening that window, you're eliminating risk, which gives you more confidence to be able to lower those prices. So I do understand it from a business standpoint.
Absolutely.
But talk about what sulfites do that we might not like.
In high additives, it just kind of, it strips the wine, it takes away its freshness. Because it is a preservative, it'll give you a long-lived wine. So something you don't want to drink for 10 years before it starts to show. But I think the whole natural wine movement is moving to younger, fresher tasting wines that are juicier. And with that comes the farming practices. In order to make these wines more accessible, we're picking the fruit earlier in the vineyard, because we're farming with a lighter hand than conventional. So as a byproduct, these wines are getting lighter, because think about it like a tomato, a green tomato. How often do you see a rotten or infected green tomato versus a really ripe red tomato? When those sugars are really rolling, the critters find their way. So I like to use that analogy.
Right. Yeah. No, it does, and it does make sense. That's really interesting. I like that as a general rule, right? Natural wines will tend to be lighter, and I'm also kind of stuck on what you were saying a moment ago, with sulfites and how sulfites extend the length of a wine. They give you something that's you can age for longer. And I mean, when I was learning my wine, who do you read? You read Robert Parker.
Yep.
What does Robert Parker say? These wines are beginning to show magnificently and will continue to show magnificently for another 5 years. And of course, what we're referring to is some left bank Bordeaux that is already 20 years old.
Yeah.
Right. And so that just kind of struck me as a good thing.
Yeah.
And people, I think people in the wine world say like, oh, that's a nice, you look for those old label statements, and you look for old labels from traditionally good vintages, right? And that seems to be like, well, if you get a good label and you get a good vintage, chances are it's going to be a really good bottle if it was properly stored. But what natural wine is saying is like, well, maybe don't wait so long and you don't need the sulfites.
Yeah. And even the best made examples that have no sulfur, they can age as well. It's a misconception that natural wine can't age, but as a whole, the movement is younger, fresher wines.
Yeah, and so we've got this the Fizz. What's the
Franck Fizz?
Franck Fizz. So we've got our Franck Fizz right here.
Yeah.
And when you opened it, you had to kind of like let the air out very gradually because it was intensely fizzy.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why that is?
Yeah. So when we calculate to the best that we can the total sugars in the marquette and how fizzy this end product will be from that secondary fermentation, but it's not a direct science. So we opened it very carefully because all that 10% of marquette created all these fine bubbles. The byproduct of fermentation is CO2. The CO2, we can see it here. When it gets created, it naturally rises and it looks to escape the bottle. But with a crown cap on it, it has nowhere to go.
Right.
So it reintegrates, and this got a pretty healthy secondary fermentation, leading to a nice fizzy mouthfeel.
Right, and that's the same way they make champagne, right? They add, well, instead of adding extra juice, they just add sugar.
Exactly.
Right, and that's what creates. So that's why it's carbonated, and so that's not with natural wine. That's not necessarily a sign of anything wrong or different about it. It's just kind of like that's just how some of them are made.
Exactly.
So what kind of notes do you usually give on this? I mean, when I first nosed it, I got some really nice like raspberry kind of like fresh red berry notes.
Absolutely, and really fresh cherries.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm almost getting, and I think this speaks to the brightness and the lightness that you were referring to earlier. I'm getting even some like apricot-y and stone fruity notes to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially as it has opened up. But yeah, there's that like raspberry through line. This reminds me of like a Clover Club, because that's a sour cocktail.
Yeah,
right? It's got the acid, but it's also got that classic raspberry syrup. So if you've ever seen a picture of that pink cocktail in the coupe glass, traditionally garnished with a cocktail pick that has 3 raspberries on it with that nice egg white head, that is your Clover Club. And so this reminds me, because of the brightness of it and also that raspberry note, it's like, oh, this is sending me to Clover Club land.
And even the carbonation on it kind of gives you the egg white creaminess.
Right. Wow. This is really remarkable. And it strikes me that there's more things you can do with this than simply just pair it with a steak, right? Like, what do you do with red wine? Well, you pair it with red meat. So what would you do with this? Like, what is the use application of this red wine? When do you want to drink it, and what do you want to have with it?
Yeah, this is so versatile. That brightness you refer to, this can pair well with a salad with goat cheese. This can pair well with pizza, red sauce, with the bubbly red aspect. It's almost like a Lambrusco.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I love goat cheese. Oh man, like a nice. This would be a really great charcuterie board wine.
You were right on that.
Yeah, because it's got it goes both ways. It's going to go with that nice creamy goat cheese, but it's also it's a red, so it's got some of those dark fruit notes that can really pair with some of the like an aged Gouda or something like that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, really, What do you really want when you're having charcuterie? What you really want is something that can cut through some of that fat, and
Absolutely.
and a little bit of brightness is good for that. So usually with charcuterie, you're seeing some of those, the higher acidity French wines, perhaps like a Beaujolais or maybe a Hermitage, something like that. But this, man, it just feels like a great opportunity to start breaking some of the rules that are given to us traditionally.
Yeah.
Man, it is such a pleasure.
That's one of the benefits of being here in the United States, where there aren't, we're allowed to grow whatever grape varieties we choose. It's nice. In France, if you want to claim your AOC status, you have to grow. If you're an Hermitage, you're growing Syrah. You can't grow Gamay, you can't grow anything else. You can, but then you'll be a Vin de France. You're declassified, and these declassified wines aren't sustainable. For most people.
Yeah, from a cost standpoint, you're not going to get as much money from it. And it's so interesting because I'm intensely interested in the AOC or the DOCG. Like, is there a generic term for that? Is AOC the worldwide term?
So each country has their own. The DOCG is the highest level in Italy. The AOC, I believe it's now the AOP in France, is theirs. Every country's kind of got their own.
Does the P mean protected, I'm guessing? Yeah,
exactly.
So the C meant controlled, the P means protected.
That sounds more friendly.
I guess. Yeah. It's to zoom out and explain this to people who are watching or listening at home. Basically, what we're referring to here are laws that only allow people within a certain geographic area to grow a certain type of wine, and what comes along with that are stipulations. Like you're saying, for example, well, you can't grow Gamay. If you're doing that, well, you're not part of this little thing. And there's status associated with that, and in some places it makes sense. There's good things and bad things to this debate, right? There's good things and bad things to protecting things, right? It's part of that, like, kind of security versus freedom conversation. Do you want to be more secure, or do you want to have more freedom to experiment, play around, break rules? And so in that way, would you say that the United States is like one of the leaders in the natural wine world?
Great question. Classically, the natural wine movement, the Loire Valley is kind of one of the homes. That's where Pet Nat first got its creation, which is the sparkling wine that predates Champagne by over 200 years. And to get into that really quickly, Pet Nat, unlike Champagne, is a singular fermentation. And unlike Franck Fizz, it's one fermentation that starts out in stainless steel and then transfers mid-fermentation into bottle, where it finishes that last hump of fermentation, giving you a light sparkle.
Yeah. Interesting. I did not realize it predated Champagne in that way. And it's not, I mean, to be fair, it's not the Champagne method.
Nope. It is. It's called Pétillant Natural, Pet Nat for short. These are becoming they're becoming very in right now all across the United States, even though they've been doing it in France for a very long time. We're doing, I believe, 9 different Pet Nats this year here at our
just here
winery.
At the winery.
We are, yeah.
So that's been, and this the Franck Fizz is kind of straddling those two fermentation styles,
Yes.
right? Because you did add sugar, which Pet Nat doesn't do, but you added it in the form of just like more like grape juice. It wasn't like
fresh juice.
Yeah. So you're it did finish its fermentation in the bottle, but it's not like a traditional Champagne method. Wow. So you're doing how many Pet Nats?
I believe 9 different Pet Nats, all single variety.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many? Let's just step back for a second. Pet Nat is definitely one of these terms that, if you're curious about the natural wine movement, you're gonna want to check out. It's like one of the big terms I wanted to make sure we talked about today. But you're doing 9 of them here at the winery. How many bottles or labels do you put out per season or per vintage?
Yeah. So we did 3 our first year: Albarino, Gruner Veltliner, and Syrah Rosé. The next year, I believe we did 6, so we added a couple to the lineup. Last year, we did a skin contact Albarino, a really fun collaboration with one of our favorite bars in Baltimore, Fadensan. And yeah, this year we did 9 last year and 9 again this year.
Wow. So and so all 9 are pet nats.
All 9 are pet nats. This was kind of this is not quite a pet nat. This is a sparkling wine that strays from the norm.
Yeah, it's kind of funky. I like it. I love the half wax and like half wax to give. I mean, I'm sure it's practical, but it's also keeps that cap on. But it's kind of a funky looking wine. I like it.
Thank you.
So those of you listening or tuning in on YouTube, we're drinking this dope 2017/2019 Franck Fizz.
Labeled 2017 because it's 90% from 2017.
There you go. So we're drinking this lovely wine. We're going to be right back here at Old Westminster Winery to talk about some of the terms that you really want to keep on your radar in addition to pet nat if you want to learn more about natural wine. And we're back. So terms in the natural wine space are very important because I think all of these major wine trends have kind of certain terms associated with them, and we just kind of accept that as, we learn these terms. We learn things like left bank, right bank when talking about Merlot. We learn things like the different fermentation methods in the champagne world, for example. But natural wine has its own set of terms that are really important, and I think they're way less known, obviously. So I wanted to go through some of them here, and one that you just mentioned is skin contact. So as we get into a few terms, what the heck does skin contact mean? I mean, it sounds lovely. It sounds like it sounds like you're just cuddling with someone. Yeah,
it's basically the wine version of cuddling. So skin contact is something that's prevalent in all red wines, or else you'd have a rosé. It is where you crush the grapes, and the juice and the skins have a extended period of maceration. So you get flavors, colors, tannins, more things are being extracted from the skins. Normally a white wine is pressed and the juice is extracted away from the skins, but an orange wine is a white wine that spends time with its skins, gaining color. So you can have a really light, just a hint of orange in an orange wine, to the really traditional stuff that's been made in Georgia, the country of Georgia, for thousands of years, where they spend almost a year in, they call them qvevri, they're large clay pots that they've been making wine in. They bury them underground, and that was old school temperature control for them.
Yeah, and it does make sense, right? Yeah. It's an easy way to do it. So skin, so this is interesting too. And this definitely is right on with our theme of not really innovating, but basically like taking things that are traditionally not done in Western winemaking, right? The Bordeaux, Burgundy, kind of South Africa, Australia, South America style of winemaking in these really established, well-worn regions. If you're making white wine, you're not putting the skins on it.
Yep.
And yet here we are putting the skins in. So you just mentioned orange wine, and we've got one of those to check out. Do you want to pour it and give it a little time to open up in the glasses here while we finish up our Franck Fizz?
Yeah, so this is called Seeds and Skins. This is a 100% Pinot Gris.
Also known as Pinot Grigio if you're in Italia.
Same grape.
This
spends only 2 days on skins.
Wow, and you can definitely still see quite an influence.
Yes, so it's funny, so many people drink Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris, but they've never seen what it looks like. I'd recommend everyone just hop on Google real quick and take a look. Pinot Grigio, if you were unfamiliar, it looks like a red grape. You would never know that it's genetically a white grape by looking at it.
Right. And the same goes for something like Pinot Noir, which is a grape that has a red skin. But what most people don't know is that Pinot Noir is commonly used in Champagne, which is a white wine. Yep. So, if you've ever seen the term Blanc de Noir, that means that there's both the Chardonnay grape, the Blanc, the white grape. It is a white grape on the vine, but the Pinot Noir is a red grape on the vine. So this would be a perfect kind of comparison. Like if we were to have, a Pinot Noir orange wine, that would be an example where they left the skins in there, right?
So that would actually just be a red wine. So skin contact for any red grapes is kind of the traditional
Okay.
the traditional processing. But you could do, I guess, the kind of opposite of orange wine is rosé, something that everyone's very familiar with, which is where you take the red grapes and then you treat them traditionally like a white grape, where you crush the juice immediately and separate the skins.
I see.
So you could get a very light rosé. Something like Pinot Noir is so light with its pigments that you could actually make a white wine out of Pinot Noir.
Wow. Yeah. And again, like, this is why we're sitting here talking about this, because you would never think to do that. It's like the whole natural wine movement is like this constant series of revelations to me, and they're not even like revelations in the paradigm shifting sense. It's like, yeah, people have been doing this in Georgia for thousands of years.
Yeah.
This is not new stuff, which is why it's so exciting to me, because I feel like I'm uncovering a part of my palate and a part of my like culinary experience that has just been kind of like covered up by vines and stuff. I feel like I'm uncovering like a ruin right now. It's always been there.
Yeah.
It's just never known about it.
You just kind of have to move the vines out of the way and
Yeah. So
jump in.
what do we expect here from an orange wine in this style?
Yeah, so a little less. It'll definitely have that citrusiness that you expect from Pinot Gris, but this time I feel like the stone fruit might be a little more amplified from that extended contact.
Yeah, I definitely get some like creamy apricot on the nose.
Yeah, almost verging into tropical territory, like light tropical.
I could see like a candied pineapple almost.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing, the weird thing about candied pineapple as a tasting note is that candied pineapple to me is less sweet than regular pineapple because it's dried.
Yeah.
Like you're taking away some of the juiciness of it. Yeah, and so I could totally see that as like blurring into that stone fruit spectrum. This is a really compelling nose, and it reminds me, I'll come out and say it. I won't touch Pinot Grigio on the shelf.
Yeah.
It's generally a garbage wine to me.
Yeah, a lot of that part of the world it's a sea of Pinot Grigio, and none of it is farmed meticulously. It's just a product that needs to hit the bottom line pricing for someone to just take home on a Wednesday that doesn't really care what they're drinking.
It's Cougar Juice.
Yes.
Yeah. And this, man, I'm perfectly content just smelling this, and I'm almost starting to get some almost meaty notes from it.
Yeah, some smokiness.
Yeah, because if you think about Pinot Noir, this is a great example of a quality in a wine that when it's made at a really low quality is a really bad thing.
Yeah.
But when you treat it really intentionally, and when you really think about how you want to present this and do it without preservatives, you can get this really wonderful expression. So let me break that down for folks. I just said that this has sort of like a meaty note. What does that mean? There's no meat in this glass. And we were just talking about things like stone fruit and pineapple. Those aren't even remotely meaty. So what do I mean when I'm saying this? What I mean is that in the worst possible version of Pinot Grigio, when I smell it, it smells like I'm smelling bleach. It smells very basic in terms of acid base. And yet when you taste it, it tends to be a high acidity wine. Mm-hmm. Another flavor or aroma that can do that sometimes is cardamom. If you stick your face in a bag full of cardamom, it can smell like ammonia, which is kind of in that bleachy ammonia cleaner spectrum. But this has a very subtle basicness to it that I think may be part of the skin contact here. That it's lending this note, which is typically present in really bad Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio wine, but here it just gives it that slight meaty or smoky quality that I think you get. And I think that's a way to walk up to a grape and say, listen, man, I know you're usually treated poorly, but we're going to treat you well and see what you can do. It's kind of like, to me, it's a bit of a redemption story for the Pinot Gris.
Yeah.
And I love it. I have not even taken a sip. I just love smelling it because it's so compelling. It's got these weird fruity notes that you usually don't see in conjunction. And then it's got this slight kind of savory quality, little bit. It reminds me of almost like not pancetta, like prosciutto.
Yeah.
Like a prosciutto wrapped melon, right? We're talking about this.
I was just about to say, I'm getting a nice melaniness, like creamy, almost papaya.
Yeah.
The creamy papaya.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're in Maryland right now, Pawpaw,
Yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. Got the gents over at Baltimore Spirits Company making their Pechuga-style smoked apple brandy using pawpaws, and you're right.
Local mezcal.
Yeah. Can't
Is that protected? Can you call it that?
No, they can't call it that for sure. But yeah, man, is it special. All right, I'm going to taste it now. I got it.
Yeah, it's great. The texture on this, man.
Wow. And you can't see any carbonation, but you can taste it. You can taste
Just
a little
touch.
bit. Yeah.
Just a touch.
And wow. Yeah, and it's funny too. Like I don't know if you've ever seen those scalp stimulators. It's like a little thing, and it goes like basically like this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel like that happens to my tongue when I taste this wine. It's a very gentle stimulation. It doesn't feel like I'm taking like a big swig of like super bubbly water, like a Topo Chico. You ever have that where it's like, well, it feels like your mouth is like you've got like pop rocks in there.
You should try the Singa water. Have you had theirs?
No.
Oh man, that's like twice as carbonated as Topo.
It's crazy, right? So it's nothing like that. It's like as far from that as you can possibly get. But I feel still like it's almost like it's exciting and stimulating the palate, but almost like below your consciousness.
Yeah, it's like a waltz of bubbles on your tongue.
Wow. This is so cool. And so for folks watching and listening, I deliberately came in here without doing any research on this, which is usually not what I like to do. I usually like to be able to steer the conversation very carefully, but I knew that this was such an unknown continent to me that I wanted to have some of the surprise here be legitimate so that you can like follow along with me and see what is actually exciting about this. And to me, something like this, where it's a varietal that I've traditionally hated, that I can just walk up to and be like, this is probably the coolest thing I've had all month. In terms of like any sort of spirit, cocktail, wine, beer, like this is.
Thank you. Glad you're enjoying it.
The Franck Fizz is delightful, and I would, if there was a charcuterie board, we would just be digging in right now. But this is almost like an intellectual experience for me, especially because this is my first orange wine.
Really?
Yes.
You've never had orange wine before?
Yes, I've never had it. It's incredible.
Well, this is a really nice, gentle opening to orange wine. A lot of it can be quite tannic from extended macerations. Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned, this is only 2 days on its skins.
Right.
Sometimes they can see, we make one that's we just bottled called Terracotta. It's our very first amphora aged wine. And an amphora is, like the Qvevri I mentioned earlier, a large clay pot.
Yes.
So we did a 62-day skin maceration Pinot Grigio in 2018, and we just sent it to bottle 10 days ago. I'll definitely make sure to find some for you to try. Yeah,
that sounds really exciting. So this is a really good segue, because I really wanted to talk about some of the implications of skin contact in these orange wines, and it seems to me that, yeah, like you said, like the tannins could get really aggressive, like with those Georgian wines, like a year.
Yeah, like a year, and they're really highly tannic varieties. Like they're almost more tannic than a lot of reds that you try.
Yeah.
But they also carry with them, the Georgian ones, a lot of salinity, like so much umami. They're begging for food.
Yeah. Yeah, and this, when we talk about wines, you're kind of always in the universe of food.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you can absolutely have wine in a vacuum. We're doing it right now. We're tasting a wine without food, but it just seems in a way that like a spirit. When I talk about a bourbon, all right, maybe I'm thinking about some flavor notes that are related to food, but usually I'm not thinking about like, all right, well, what kind of meal am I going to pair this bourbon with? And so we talked about some opportunities with the Franck Fizz. What might one pair with like a light? We'll call this like a light example of an orange wine.
To me, I get a lot of like forest floor notes in this wine, and I instantly think of like a nice sautéed chanterelle, like polenta. Would be really lovely with this. Maybe a roast chicken to pair with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is absolutely a chickeny wine because it's got some of those like you're right. Like I could like see a rosemary or a sage like kind of influence here. It's like it feels very harvesty.
Yes.
Right.
This feels like a fall wine.
Right. And, whenever I'm trying to set up a food and wine pairing or a food and cocktail pairing or whatever it is, like, the first thing that you want to ask is like, all right, what season are we in? What are we celebrating with this? And how can the wine and the food celebrate one another?
Yeah.
Right.
That's what it's all about historically.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed. Beautiful natural wine, courtesy of Joey Fox and Old Westminster Winery, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2019.